I'm here this morning to interview one of our really special guests, Salak, who is an intrepid adventurer, solo traveler, writer, a great communicator, and who has participated in one of the panels at the festival this year. So it's a real pleasure to welcome you to this. And I hope you don't mind my asking you some questions.
Oh, thank you for having me.
All right. Kira, you've just come back from a big trip. It was just about a week ago, or so where were you and what were you doing?
I was doing the Snowman trek in Bhutan.
Okay.
And it's considered the hardest high altitude trek in the Himalayas. And it was basically, we did 11 passes over 15,500 feet in 24 days.
Wow.
So, yeah, that was what I was doing.
How many, were you there just for that period of time, or was it an extended period of time?
I was there longer than that, but the trek itself was approximately 24 days.
Right. And you said we. Who was we?
I went with a photographer because it was for a National Geographic Adventure article, and then there were a few other men on the trip as well.
Oh yes, I heard you refer to the campfire conversations.
Yeah.
So can you explain that a little bit?
Well, I just I was just surprised that pretty much every conversation that we had up in the mountains was about sort of the same sorts of topics, like motorcycles or climbing or rugby, and so I found myself missing female companionship pretty quickly.
Is that right?
The conversations weren't...
They were pretty specific.
Pretty specific and about things I don't really personally know about.
So in addition to the photographer then, were the other people all local? Sort of local experts in the area or guides? Or?
No, they were just actually from different countries. One was an Australian friend of mine. And,
oh, okay.
Yeah,
So it was Kira and the boys.
Kira and the boys, yeah.
Kira and the boys in Bhutan.
Yeah.
Now I understand that since you've come back, you might have brought some there might be some remnants of your trip, and you're feeling a little under the weather.
Yeah, I think I have. Well, I seem to have brought back dysentery when I got back, but and so I haven't been feeling very well. But
now, does that happen? You know, sometimes after your trips. I mean, is there a recovery time?
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten sick on, I'd say, a majority of my trips, and so generally I need like a week or two just to sort of unwind and just get centered again, and so I didn't really have that opportunity with this Bhutan trip. So. And
getting centered again, is that because of the physical stress that your body's been through, or is it also kind of a cultural readjustment?
I would say it's both cultural and physical, and just traveling a lot and you know, being on planes for over 24 hours, it's hard to find peace of mind. I need some time alone to just sort of get back.
So after you've done your solo trips, then you need some time alone.
Right, yeah.
Got it. On the Bhutan trip, then you have a plan to write something about this?
Yeah, for National Geographic Adventure magazine.
Okay. You know, years ago I interviewed Heinrich Harr, an Austrian climber, explorer, and so on, and he said that he never regarded his adventures to be complete or a success unless he did three things. He called it his hat trick theory. One was, you know, very good preparation, one was the trip itself, and the other was the communication of that trip afterwards, somehow telling the story. It seems from what I've read about you that you have that approach as well, that that the communication seems to be a big part of it. Is that true, or just telling the story after? Yeah,
I mean, I do a lot of journal writing and stuff while I travel, and that's the most important part for me, I'd say, is what I can sort of take away from the trip on a personal level and perhaps communicate to people. Because I think a lot of these sort of trips can seem like a lot of daring do, like getting to the top of a mountain, and it's and I think it's about, for me, these trips are about the inner journey as much as the external journey, and what I have learned about myself and about the world and what I can communicate to other people. And so I think it may seem like the facade of what I do, you know, like paddling 600 miles to Timbuktu solo or whatever. It can seem like maybe some sort of big ego trip on my part or something, but it's not about ego. It's about kind of learning learning about parts of myself that I might not have known, and then also kind of what I can communicate to other people about just sort of going out and doing something that may seem at first frightening or
a bit overwhelming.
Yeah. So that's the thing is, you know, I'm not interested in sort of the daring do. I'm not interested in being the first person to make it to the top of a mountain or something. I'm interested in what I can learn about myself and about other people, and that's sort of the reason why I do these trips.
Mm-hmm. What kind of feedback do you get from people who read your stories? I mean, you must get all kinds of response.
Well, I mean, it's really varied.
Mm-hmm. I mean, are people moved by your experiences? Are they just impressed by what you did physically? Or?
Yeah, I mean, my stuff, the books that I've written and the articles, they tend to sort of have the internal journey as much as the external journey. And so I get a lot of feedback, particularly from women, kind of thanking me for introducing that into the adventure travel literature genre. Because I hear back from a lot of women sort of almost complaining that a lot of these books are sort of inaccessible because they're all about some man kind of chest thumping and getting to the top of a mountain, and it's kind of not something that a lot of women feel they can relate to. And so I get a lot of responses like that. I mean, on the other hand, I have gotten responses to, like, for example, my kayaking to Timbuktu trip. Women sort of getting angry that I, as a lone woman, would go out and do something like that and camp alone on the side of a river, and I mean, literally getting angry. And so there's some sense maybe that they have insecurity about doing something like that themselves. And so
why are they angry with you then?
Well, because for example, I camped alone alongside the river, and some men saw my tent, and they started approaching my tent, and I wrote in my article about how I had to literally flee and throw all my stuff in my kayak and flee into the river. And so that elicited some responses along the lines of, well, serves me right for being a lone woman camping alone.
You were asking for it.
Yeah, and I should have known that I would be vulnerable and unprotected and all the rest of it. So there's just some kind of, there's some interesting sort of, it runs the gamut as far as responses, but I'd say most of the responses come largely from women. And the men who respond, it's sort of, I tend to get different kinds of responses from the men. But.
Was it you who brought up the myth of vulnerability at the
Yeah,
panel?
yeah,
Okay.
it was sort of.
Can you just talk about that a little bit? I think that was quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, to sort of clarify with that, I believe that men and women are equally as vulnerable in the world. In other words, we're equally as susceptible to violence or whatever. And I think what's happened is that there's been this belief that women are somehow more vulnerable than men. And I would argue that that's not the case, but that sort of belief system that women are more vulnerable and that they need to be protected has been adopted by a lot of women, and often unconsciously, and it's been socialized to young girls. And so I think what it's created is this sort of sense that women believe that they are more vulnerable, and they believe that therefore they have to they ought not to take as many risks, or if they are, they need to have the protection of a man with them, or these sorts of beliefs. And I think that it's sort of fostered this notion that women aren't as capable in the world. And so you don't see as many women explorers out there. You don't see as many women adventurers or mountain climbers or whatever it is. And kind of my sense, and I'm not saying I have the answer to this issue, but my sense is that women are taught to believe that they're not as capable as men, and that they are more vulnerable. And so that's sort of one of the consequences of that, is the lack of women doing those sorts of things.
Well, possibly it's not just women who have that feeling, then it's also men who have that feeling, and that probably impacts the way, you know, you are treated, or the response to your being out there too. Now, so would you say then that, I remember somebody saying that they felt that men and women, or boys and girls, were hardwired differently. I sort of would get the feeling from you then that you don't agree with that.
Well, I mean, you can talk about physiologically hardwired, but I think it all comes down to what a person believes about themselves and believes about the world, and that's ultimately going to create the reality that they have. And so I don't believe that women are hardwired differently. I do believe that they're socialized differently, and that they receive these messages from the time that they're very small, that they need to be more careful, and that they ought not to do certain things. They ought not to pick up insects. They ought not to get muddy. They ought not to travel to the third world by themselves. You know, like there are all these beliefs, and it's just a matter of I think a lot of women need to stop sort of looking externally at what the men are preventing them from doing in the world, and looking at their own belief systems and how they're inhibiting themselves from achieving what they want in life.
Do you think that when you're traveling, possibly because you're a woman, or maybe because of just who you are, that your experiences and the way you relate to the people that you meet is different? I mean, is there more of an emotional approach, or more of a sensitive approach? Do you?
I don't know. I mean, there was an interesting occurrence that happened on my Bhutan trip. We were in this very remote village, and there was a woman in the village who it sounded like she was dying, or she was very ill, and she was about 2 weeks away from just the nearest town, and she'd have to take these really remote mountain passes just to get to a town. And so there were no doctors, there was no help for her, and it sounded like she had something where if she could get to a hospital, she could potentially, her life could be saved. And so there was me and the 8 men, and we were sitting down sort of pondering her situation, and I said, well, I'd be willing to donate $1,000 right now to get a chopper in to take her to a hospital. And the men with me were they had different responses. They were like, well, the woman's 65, she's at the end of her life anyway, you know, or another man would say, well, you do better giving that money to preventative medicine in the Himalayas rather than throwing it at one person. You know, and another person was like, well, you just want to do that because you have you feel guilty because you're privileged and Western, and so I knew if I could get more people to donate money, because I didn't have enough for a chopper ride myself, we could get a chopper in and fly her to a hospital. But none of the men was willing to do that. So I don't know if that's the kind of male-female thing, and I'm not saying that my response was more compassionate or more this, that, or the other than theirs, but I'm just saying there were very different responses. Mine was, you know, I don't know, so that was
you were trying to initiate something, and by being the first person to step up to the plate, wanted to see what kind of response.
Well, I mean, I really wanted to just do something for her, and she needed to get to a hospital.
So what happened? And
the men were unwilling to donate any money for a chopper. So, and I'm not placing a judgment on that, but I'm just saying it was very interesting that no one else was willing to offer any money for that. So the woman's probably dead now. She couldn't get out. Yeah, she's too sick.
One of the things you mentioned in that story was you felt that they were, well, no, you didn't feel, they were telling you that you were just feeling guilty, and that's why you were offering up the $1,000. I mean, do you ever think about whether or not you have a social responsibility in your travels? I mean, partially to avoid the feelings of guilt, or just to make your travels really mean something and have value to the rest of society?
Well, I would first of all disagree that I had a feeling of guilt in that situation.
Right. Yeah.
That was just a sort of response of let's relieve somebody's suffering if possible. But I mean, I do feel like if I'm in a position to sort of help someone in these cultures that I visit, you know, I will do what I can. And I do feel like I don't want to be like a voyeur of other people's lives and kind of go in and see what they're going through and see their suffering and just sort of go back to the U.S. and everything's fine. Like if I feel I can do something, I'd like to do something. And that's sort of...
I'm thinking too about the social responsibility about when you do come back to the U.S.
Oh, okay.
You know, how does that sort of manifest itself? Is it through the writing? Is it through speaking to people or kids, or do you not feel that sort of sense of, okay, I've done this, I've had this 2-month period, now I have to somehow give back?
Well, I mean, like, for example, when I covered the war and genocide in Eastern Congo, it was a very dangerous situation, and I was one of 5 journalists who were even able to get into the war zone, and so I put my life at great risk in order to report on the situation. In the rest of the Western media, nobody was reporting on it at all, and there were just tens of thousands of people getting their arms and legs chopped off and whatnot. So, and then on the trip back, I ended up getting cholera and almost died from cholera. So I feel like my contribution is, at least in that situation, was I was willing to put my life on the line to tell the world about the story of what was happening to these people. And so that's sort of I feel like that's my way of giving back through my writing and talking about situations that no one knows about. So.
What was the first piece of writing that you did following one of your trips? I'd be curious to know what that is, or was. Do you remember?
The very first?
Yeah, the first time you came back from a trip and actually wrote it down and submitted it, and it was published, and people that you didn't know read about it.
Well, when I was 20, I backpacked alone around Africa and came back and wrote an article about Madagascar. So that was the first travel article I ever got published.
One of the things that has struck me from reading your articles, particularly with National Geographic Adventure, but also from your books, is that at some point along the way, you need some images. And of course, I mean, you can take lots of images, but in terms of images of you, then someone has to be brought in to sort of document the visual part. And I was just wondering, how does that feel when you're, say, in the middle of a trip, or at some point in your trip, which is a solo trip, and the only people you're relating to are the people in the country, and all of a sudden you have a partner, and you're in front of a camera. I mean, is that a jarring experience?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it can upset the sort of relationship I may be forming with the local people, and but I mean, like my kayaking to Timbuktu trip, I organized it so that I wouldn't. They needed shots for the magazine article, and so the photographer would find me like every 4 or 5 days and shoot photos for maybe an hour or 2 and then disappear, and I wouldn't see them. So I really wanted to maintain the integrity of the trip.
So you do have to work at that, though. Like, you have to orchestrate it.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of, I understand in some situations I need to have a photographer, but I mean, I've done stories where I've shot the photos myself, so I didn't have to have that sort of, the bond I might have with the local people interrupted somehow. So.
Is there a particular photographer that you like to work with?
Well, I really liked working with Bobby Modell. Unfortunately, he had, there was a carjacking experience in South Africa, and he was almost killed. So he's kind of out of that business right now. So.
And I think he was supposed to go to Bhutan, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, we did Libya and Iran together.
Oh, okay, yeah. Have you always wanted to travel solo, or has that sort of evolved? I mean, when you're from your first trips, you said your first trip was backpacking solo.
Yeah.
Has that always been your way?
It is. I mean, I think I'm just, my personality is I'm pretty introverted, and as far as the solo travel part, I just I feel, first of all, that if there's somebody with me, particularly a man, then I find that a lot of the local people in the developing world will approach the man and sort of see him as being in charge or something. And so I feel like I have a different experience when I'm with a man. And it's also this idea that I feel like I'm missing the world if I have somebody with me. Like if I'm chit-chatting with somebody else, and I'm not fully present with the places and the people that I'm meeting. So So that's the other thing too, and I like the fact that sort of when I travel solo, I can go where I want to go, and
you get to make all the decisions.
I get to make the decisions. But I mean, really, frankly, the reason why I tend to travel solo is there's literally no one who would want to do the trips that I want to do.
Right.
So I mean, like kayaking 600 miles to Timbuktu, like they couldn't even find a photographer willing to do kayak part of that. You know, so I mean, it's just sort of, there's sort of tend to be unpleasant trips in inhospitable parts of the world, and so particularly women, I don't know a single woman who would ever want to do any of the trips that I've had planned. So it's sort of that's also sort of the reason why I've done solo trips.
Do you find as well that regardless of whether you're with a man or a woman, just when you're with someone, that you're less approachable by locals? I mean, you're kind of a unit then, whereas when you're by yourself, you're completely
I think so, and I think particularly in the developing world, a lot of the men I meet will see me as being like they need to come to my aid more if I'm like a lone Western woman. Like, and so it creates some interesting situations of people approaching me who wouldn't normally approach me if I were with somebody else. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely changed the dynamic.
It's a different dynamic,
Yeah.
What is? I'm sure you've had lots of kind of tense situations in your travels, but can you just tell me about one particular very scary situation, something that really frightened you?
I guess sort of I mean, I have had several pretty frightening situations. Probably the most frightening was when I was 20 and backpacking around Central Africa alone, and I decided to cross through Mozambique during its civil war, and the only way you could go through Mozambique was in a truck convoy, and it was like guarded by government soldiers, and so I hitchhiked in this truck as part of this truck convoy, and the truck I was in was just really run down, and the driver warned me. He said, "I'll take you through the war zone, but you should know that my truck has been broken and it breaks down a lot, and there's a possibility that something could happen." So we were in this truck convoy passing through, you know, and through the rebel territory, and sure enough, our truck broke down. And
of course.
Yeah, it wasn't as much of a problem for the driver because he was a man, but because I was like this 20-year-old girl, like in the middle of like this rebel territory, and this war had been raging for 17 years. Like I was just really an anomaly. And so some local government soldiers, it's sort of hard to explain, but there's no real loyalty between the government soldiers and the rebels. They sort of change sides all the time in this situation, and they're mostly kids or teenagers and
armed.
And so you're kind of at the mercy of these people. And so they saw me and basically decided that they wanted me. They wanted to gang rape me. And so I was taken to this building by the Zimbabwean border. I was really close to the Zimbabwean border, but anyway, I was taken to this building, and they were sort of, they were just clearing out this back room. They were getting really drunk and clearing out this back room of this rundown building to just basically just rape me all night, and probably would have killed me afterwards or something. But at any rate, I said I had to go to the toilet or whatever, and they pointed across the room to where the toilet hole was, and as I was walking there, I just ran out the front door and just ran for my life. And
where did you run to?
Just out into the savannah or whatever.
Right. And were there people out there?
There were soldiers and various, and they were chasing after me. And so I hid out, and then what ended up happening was the Zimbabwean border was closed at sundown. And so I ended up finding like the truck convoy by the Zimbabwean border, and like the truck that I had hitchhiked in was parked there. They hadn't been able to cross. So I basically went to the truck and found the driver I'd been with and hid in the truck, and got across the border that way. But it was sort of in the morning before the truck crossed to the Zimbabwean side, the soldiers found out where I was, and so they'd come by with their with their knives, and they'd tap the knives against the glass of the truck window, or they'd pile.
And it was locked? You had it all
Yeah,
locked
it was
up?
all locked. It was sort of, they'd pile like truck tires in a big pile, and they'd stand on the top of the pile so they could look in the truck at me because it was really high up, and they'd just take their knives and kind of go like this. And so it was like that kind of thing for a few hours until the border opened, and then I got out. So.
That's fairly memorable.
Yeah.
God. I just learned this morning that you had a fairly intense experience in South America, not experimenting with, but working with ayahuasca. And I'd be really interested to hear about that experience too.
Well, that sort of started through a New York Times story I did. And
Okay.
I wanted to do a story on a sort of alternative kind of tour.
Yeah.
And I chose a shamanic tour.
Right.
And it turned out that it was an ayahuasca shamanism tour. And in the course of doing that, basically you do 5 ceremonies and you drink this concoction called ayahuasca, which is it's like a plant tincture combination, and it creates vision experience. And so about the 3rd ceremony, the next day after the 3rd ceremony, I discovered that the lifelong depression that I'd had my entire life was completely gone. And it was like a visceral feeling, as well as just all of the sort of dark thoughts and the suicidal thoughts and everything that I just lived with and tried to deal with my whole life. They were completely gone. So it was such a profound thing, and so inexplicable that, but yet so powerful that I decided I'd go back for a second personal trip. And so so I went back the second time and discovered that other things, other issues of my life that I'd sort of never been able to deal with using Western medicine miraculously vanished one after the next.
You mean like physical things?
Physical things, anxiety disorders. I had a knee problem that completely vanished. I had migraine problems. They completely went away.
I need to do this.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not
do
sure
it.
though. It sounds like a pretty intense.
Well, it's extremely intense. You're basically, the shamans believe that the cause of all this stuff is, they believe in the reality in another dimension that people have demons or dark energy that sort of causes these things. And so what occurs during the ayahuasca ceremony is you're literally facing your demons in the vision experiences, and they're being purged from you. And so there's vomiting, and there's quite a lot of frightening experiences, but it's all for the good. I mean, no one's ever died taking ayahuasca. It's a very intense experience, but it's extremely effective, and they've proven this. There's a few Western scientists who have studied it, and it's extremely effective for addictions, anxiety disorder, depression. So I've just had these miraculous results. I mean, literally miraculous stuff has occurred, and so now it's sort of a major part of my spiritual path is going down to Peru pretty regularly and working with the shamans and taking ayahuasca.
Wow, so it's not just 2 trips that you've done?
No, I did a lot more. When my brother died in Africa, I had like a PTSD situation, a post-traumatic stress disorder situation after his death, and because I had to go
suddenly.
Well, he died suddenly, and I had to go down and deal with the body and deal with trying to find him. At first, we didn't know if he was alive or dead, and so sort of the result of all that was I wasn't able to do my work, and I was, it was just very debilitating. So I went down to Peru again to work with the grief and the whole PTSD situation, and again, all of that stuff was very miraculously removed. And
that's amazing.
So yeah,
so it's a very positive experience for you then.
It is. It's not for everybody because it is such an intense experience, and but it's literally so completely effective for things like addiction or depression that I mean, compared to Western medicine and science, there's just no comparison. I mean, it's just so powerful and so effective. So, so.
How do you prepare yourself for something like that?
You don't really.
Just go.
You just have to have a lot of courage and faith, basically. And I still get the article I wrote about my second experience taking it with the anxiety disorders and things like that, the migraines. I wrote something for National Geographic Adventure magazine about it, and it turned out they got 20 times more reader response letters to that article than they have for anything else they've ever published. And it turned out that it was just, and the reason for that was it's just so, people are searching for something that's actually going to work. And it was just, there were so many readers who just were desperate for something that was going to help get rid of their depression. Or,
so they had identified with the
they did.
issues that you had.
And so it was an extremely popular article, and it ended up, the shamanic center where I go now has really expanded quite a bit after the article.
That's great.
And a lot of people, I mean, I've gotten so many letters from people who've said, you know, thank you for writing that because I went down and I did it and my depression's gone, or I'm no longer addicted to alcohol or drugs or whatever. And so there have been so many people who have come back from that
were really
experience,
impacted
were
by
cured, and we're so.
That must make you feel great.
It does, yeah. That's
wonderful.
To me is the ideal with my writing and my travel and all that. If I can do something that will really help other people.
Yeah,
so.
That's amazing. Before you go on an adventure of any kind, there must be a lot of preparation. I mean, physical and you know, research and all that kind of stuff. Can you describe a little bit what you do? I mean, even just physically, just to be able to do the things you do.
I mean, I'll work out at the gym, or I'll, you know.
Oh, come on, there must be more than that.
It's really a mental.
Aren't you a runner? You're some kind of a long distance runner.
Yeah, I did do running, but I mean, it's really a mental preparation.
More than physical?
If I'm gonna go to some river in West Africa and just plop a kayak in and kayak 600 miles, and if I don't know what's going to happen to me, I mean, it's really a mental and emotional preparation of just getting up the courage to do it in the first place.
But is there also lots of research about, you know, well, obviously, you know, where you're going, but also with the kinds of people you might meet or the kinds of situations you might find yourself in?
Well,
or is that completely unknown?
I'll research like the cultures and stuff like that, but I don't like to know a lot about. I mean, I don't know. I don't like to try to predict what's going to happen to me and sort of try to figure out what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So I really, honestly, go in pretty clueless.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's amazing. You know, I read someplace that you were interviewed by George Stroumboulopoulos.
Yes. Yeah.
He's kind of a offbeat icon in this country. What was that like? Was it a good interview, or was it just corny?
He was great. No, I really liked him. Yeah, yeah. We were talking about, because when I kayaked to Timbuktu, I bought a couple of women slaves and freed them.
Okay.
So it was sort of about human slavery, and it was basically, the interview was about my buying the women. And
okay.
So.
Yeah. I wish I would have seen it. I would think it would have been very amusing. Are your parents alive?
Yes.
Yeah. So what does your mother think about what you do?
They've always been pretty laissez-faire about it.
Really?
Until my brother died. I mean, they've been very.
Was he your only sibling then? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he was 2 years older.
Yeah.
So, and he died 2 years ago. So I was traveling long before he died. I don't know. I mean, they're just sort of, you know, Kira's going to do what Kira's going to do, and.
Right. They just accept it.
Yeah. Yeah. They didn't. I mean, and they were sort of always like that. They weren't very overly protective parents. They were more interested in me and my brother sort of exploring the world and discovering things, and so they didn't put a lot of restrictions on our behavior. And
did you travel with your brother? Did you ever do stuff with him?
I did. I actually traveled the world before my brother did, and so once he got into it, we would go on trips together. Yeah, but when we were younger, I mean, my parents don't travel at all, or didn't at that time when I was growing up, and so I never went camping until I started going to Africa. And
right.
So.
So what's next? Can you talk about it, or is it a big secret?
Well, I mean, after Bhutan, I'm sort of. I mean, frankly, like I have a novel coming out next year.
A novel?
Yeah.
I didn't know you wrote fiction.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm sort of in. It's coming out in. Next summer.
Okay.
So I'm in the process of just revising, making final revisions. So I'm sort of, my travel's on hold for a little while.
Yeah. Is there a title? Is there?
It's called States of Grace.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it sort of loosely based on your own experiences?
Yeah, it's about a female war correspondent.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And Henry Holt is the publisher.
Excellent. So. And obviously you're writing your story for National Geographic Adventure on the Bhutan Trip?
That's right, yeah. Good. Yeah, my life's kind of in transition now, so I'm putting travel on hold.
Okay. You just sit in front of that monitor and tap away for a bit.
Well, I'm going to be moving out of state from Missouri to Montana, and so I'm sort of, I can't do another trip for a while. I'm just kind of pretty busy.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, incredible stories. I'm sure there are, well, I know there are lots more, but really thank you for sharing some of them with us. And if there's anything in particular that you would like to say, just to wrap things up, or not, that's fine too.
No, I think that's good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kira. It's really a pleasure.
Thank you.